Hi, I'm Mrs. Han Solo, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic because George Lucas ruined my life. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. 57 years ago, I did his little Star Wars film, a cult film that then went on to redefine what they laughingly refer to as the face of cinema. And now, 65 years later, people are still asking me if I knew it was going to be that big of a hit. Yes, I knew. We all knew. The only one who didn't know was George. We kept it from him because we wanted to see what his face looked like when it changed expression. George is a sadist. But like any abused child wearing a metal bikini changed to a giant slug about to die, I keep coming back for more. George, the fact that you made me into a little doll that my first husband could stick pins into, a shampoo bottle where people could twist my head off and pour liquid out of my neck, lather up with Leia and you'll feel like a princess yourself. And though amongst your many possessions you have owned my likeness, lo, all these years, so that every time I look in the mirror, I have to send you a check for a couple of bucks. Not to mention, you had the unmitigated gall to let that chick, the new girl who plays my mother, Queen Amadillo, or whatever her name is, she wears a new hairstyle and outfit practically every time she walks through a door. I mean, I bet she even got to wear a bra, even though you told me I couldn't because there was no underwear in space. I'm only slightly bitter because you, my formerly silent friend, are an extraordinary talent, and let's face it, an artist, the like of which is seen perhaps once in a generation, who helps define that generation, and who deserves every award I now spend the latter half of my Leia-laden life helping to hurl your way. Conclusion, Your Honor, I hope I slept with you to get the job, because if not, who the hell was that guy?
Captain. Now, Viceroy, you're going to have to go back to the Senate and explain all this.
In short, our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men, and to become the world's leading spacefaring nation. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
Roger, Buzz, and break, Columbia, this is Houston. When you track out of high gain antenna limits, request Omni Delta over.
And von Braun, to his dying day, always stressed that what he was after was rockets for the purposes of going to the moon and exploring space. Just so happened, Nazi Germany intervened and Adolf Hitler was there, and World War II happened, and the work of von Braun and these other rocket experts became part of the Nazi war machine.
It was right after that opening of Peenemünde, towards the later in 1937, that Nazi Party officials approached him and several other leading members of the rocket group and said, we'd like you to join the party. It sort of rapidly became obvious that it really wasn't a choice, that they really needed to join.
As the war escalated, Werner von Braun's involvement with the Nazis deepened.
And I'll be honest with you, I'm not fully on board with Flat Earth yet.
That's a hard one.
It is a hard one.
I was violently opposed to it. I was mad at people that would bring it up.
Right.
And that's normal. Everybody that's into Flat Earth, it was very hard for them to get into it and admit it. It took like a year and a half for them to admit it.
Well, first it was just black dudes, basically. I feel like that were into it at first.
Yeah, I wasn't
like
into it.
that.
I was violently opposed to it. But the one thing about Flat Earth, you punch in Flat Earth on YouTube, you're going to get all the debunkers. And like, why is there so many people working against it? It's crazy. Yeah. They're doing the exact same thing to Flat Earth that they do to 9/11, JFK, Iran-Contra. They got people producing debunking videos. Yeah. Like, why are you doing that if it's so stupid?
It's so stupid.
And you should ask yourself, why is there a debate about it? How is there a debate still in this time with the internet? Why are people? And once I was looking into it, and I realized, oh shit, all these pictures of Earth from space, they're all CGI composites, and NASA admits it. They go, oh, you know what? We take the images and we take this information strips, and then we get an artist to put together. I'm like, wait a minute, NASA is controlling all our space information? I go, NASA does that? I thought they just did the moon and the space shuttle.
Yeah. And NASA's gutter, dude. They've been around for 60 years. They've been to the moon allegedly 4 times.
No, 6 times.
Yeah, 6 times.
And then they destroyed all the technology? Yeah. Come on, man.
Dude, that's the worst. Man. If that was a business, you'd be like, this
Come on,
is
man. You guys are, you know what? They had to say they destroyed it. What are they going to say?
Yeah, what else are they going to say?
What are they going to let people... they destroyed all the video, the raw video footage, the raw audio footage, all the telemetry data, which tracked where they were in space. All that...
What is it you want? The work has stalled. I need you to come back. I won't do it, Krennic. I'd be of no help, Krennic. My mind just isn't what it was. I have trouble remembering. Stop!
Oh, Lyra. Troublesome as ever.
You will never win.
Do it.
They have a child.
His infamous V-2 rocket was now ready for production at a secret underground factory in central Germany named Mittelwerk. But the German military needed manpower to produce the V-2s at a time when most German men were fighting on the front lines of the war.
There was, a lot of foreign workers in Nazi Germany, and there were also the SS concentration camps. And once concentration camp labor was brought to the Mittelwerk, it became the mainstay of the production force, and the conditions were a disaster, and von Braun was a direct witness to the conditions. We probably would feel better about him if we thought he was opposed to the idea of concentration camp labor, but it doesn't change the fact that he became mixed up in the actual criminal system, which led to the deaths of thousands of prisoners. And we should underline this. We're not talking about a handful of people. We're talking thousands of dead.
I remember I was a very young man in Germany, and I was so busy with my rockets that maybe in retrospect I sometimes wonder whether I shouldn't have worried a little more about some of these aspects. And as I grew older, of course, and I saw the ramifications, of course, also the suffering that's involved, you rethink some of these things.
So, if you are watching this, then perhaps there's a chance to save the Alliance. For as time went by, I knew that you were either dead, so well hidden that he would never find you. I knew if I refused to work, if I took my own life, it would only be a matter of time before Krennic realized he no longer needed me to complete the project. So I did the one thing nobody expected. I lied. I learned to lie. I played the part of a beaten man resigned to the sanctuary of his work. I made myself indispensable, and all the while, I laid the groundwork of my revenge.
Named for the Greek god of the sun, Apollo was the only manned space program to ever reach beyond Earth's lower orbit. It was powered by Wernher von Braun's massive Saturn series of rockets.
It came off the pad at the Cape very slowly. You wanted to help it go, go, go. But it was a monster rocket. Compared to the Redstone, it was a monster. But it successfully flew a couple times unmanned, and then the decision was made.
On July 16, 1969, the Huntsville team's Saturn V rocket launched Apollo 11, bound for the moon.
Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
Here, we got a roll program.
It was huge celebrations all over the city. I think it was the event that all of us looked upon as being a culmination of 8 years of working hard every day.
The moon landing was an astounding success, watched live by 500 million people on grainy black and white TV sets. For a moment, earthly concerns fell away, and the world watched breathless as Neil Armstrong touched the surface of the moon. The giant leap for mankind was a proud moment for Huntsville, and the culmination of a decade's work for the rocket team members. And as the remaining years would show, it marked the peak of the arc for Wernher von Braun.
It's hard to capture it again if you had it, unless you do something very spectacular. 3 weeks after Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, he proposed to the Space Task Group that we go to Mars. But that was not approved. Consequently, we went off and did the space shuttle, and it still have not been out of Earth orbit since 1972.
Control, Hugh Harris of NASA.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff
rocket
on
boosters
the
kicking in.
25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Control program.
Challenger going into its roll. That's planned. Miles downwind as we get
Engine throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go and throttle up. Challenger, go and throttle up.
The shuttle mission will launch. My God.
1 minute 15
There's been an explosion.
Velocity 2,900 feet per second, altitude 9 nautical miles, downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
This is not standard. This is not something that is planned, of course.
Before the event, from information that was available and understanding that was available, was it fully appreciated everywhere that this seal would become unsatisfactory at some temperature, and was there some sort of a suggestion of a temperature at which to SRB, I guess you call it,
Yes, sir.
shouldn't be run. Oh, I took the stuff that I got out of your seal and I put it in ice water. And I discovered that when you put some pressure on it for a while and then undo it, it maintains, it doesn't stretch back, it stays the same dimension. In other words, for a few seconds at least, and more seconds than that, there's no resilience in this particular material when it's at a temperature of 32 degrees. I believe that has some significance for our problem.
10, 9, 8, 7. We have a go for main engine start. 5, 3, 2, 1. We have booster ignition and liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia with a multitude of national and international space research experiments.
Houston now controlling the flight of Columbia, the international research mission finally underway.
Roger, roll, Columbia.
Columbia now rolling on to the proper azimuth for a 39-degree inclination to orbit. Shuttle in a heads-down, wings-level position for the 8.5-minute ride to orbit. 30 seconds into...
So we have 10 minutes to get gloves on. Noel, do you need help? I think I'm almost. Okay. After you get yours, then I'll get mine.
Oh, we see lots of jets firing.
I'm getting the jets firing. I'm trying to see if I can get an overhead window view yet.
Okay. That's all I can do is 3.5 bags out of 4, so that'll work. This is amazing. It's really getting really bright out there. Yep. Yeah, you definitely don't want to be outside now.
Like we did before.
At 9 o'clock this morning, Mission Control in Houston lost contact with our Space Shuttle Columbia. A short time later, debris was seen falling from the skies above Texas. The Columbia is lost. There are no survivors. On board was a crew of 7. These men and women assumed great risk in the service to all humanity. In an age when space flight has come to seem almost routine, it is easy to overlook the dangers of travel by rocket and the difficulties of navigating the fierce outer atmosphere of the Earth. These astronauts knew the dangers, and they faced them willingly, knowing they had a high and noble purpose in life. Because of their courage and daring and idealism, we will miss them all the more.
Reason for the shuttle's being was the building and the construction of the space station. So now that the space station construction is over, and they knew several years ago that it was going to be over around this time, it was time to phase out the shuttle and move on to something else. The NASA budget is less than half of 1% of the federal budget, and it looks like it'll be fairly constant, around $18 billion, $19 billion. The problem is, with that money, in order to do another new program, you have to get rid of the shuttle program and take the monies that you were using for shuttle and put it into the new vehicle. That's the...
After 299 days in space, flying 25 missions, Space Shuttle Endeavour took a last lap of honour over Los Angeles on Friday. The spaceship has travelled across America, hitching a lift on the back of a specially modified Boeing 747. Crowds cheered from Griffith Park and Observatory as the famous spacecraft soared overhead towards its retirement home. And it even took time to visit a few sites along the way. After 123 million miles and 4,671 orbits, she touched down at Los Angeles airport to a fanfare.
I'm going to talk about the flat earthers for one reason. The reason why I wanted to bring this up is because I think there's a lot of folks out there that are super gullible, and I think they're being trolled. I think they're being trolled by people who put together these... It's one of two options. Either they're being trolled by people who put together these elaborate arguments for something that they don't believe because they're just trying to make money off of YouTube views, which is entirely possible.
Don't act so surprised, Your Highness. You weren't on any mercy mission this time,
But people who just don't have the time or the inclination to actually read scientific papers and articles and journals and all these different things that explain how we've known for a long time that the Earth is round.
Right. Yeah, it's a myth that Columbus proved that the Earth is not flat, that it's round. The ancients knew, the Greeks knew, Columbus knew, everyone knew then that it was round.
The Sumerians knew.
Absolutely.
Their depictions on clay.
Right.
When they drew it in clay, they drew all the planets as circles.
Right.
They knew.
Right. I mean, there's some obvious simple ones anybody could do. If you see an eclipse, like a lunar eclipse, you can see the Earth's shadow on the moon. It's
People
round.
that think flat Earth is a psyop think that the CIA are time travelers who invented cosmos. Yeah, the flat Earth is not a psyop. Not even close. Oh, it's a psyop to make it insane to question the moon landing. If you keep ladling that gravy of moon landing and then get to the next, you will get to a point when you realize that this Earth is not moving. There's no movement. It can't.
Come on, we gotta get out of here.
I was watching a documentary recently about flat earthers that was fascinating. I don't know if anybody saw this. There are people who believe the Earth is flat. The documentary is called Assholes. But I had to watch it. I'm like, I have to see if people really believe this. And not only do they believe it, they're adamant and they tell people, they're like, you've been lied to your whole life. They're lying about the shape of the Earth. And all I keep thinking is, why would anybody lie about the shape of the Earth? Who wins?
Be so pleased when you hear what I have to say, Viceroy. I have word that the Chancellor's ambassadors are with you now, and that you have been commanded to reach a settlement. Beware, Viceroy. The Federation has gone too far this time.
On my right, sphere. If you think that is the shape of the Earth, point to it now. If you think the other model is the shape of the Earth, point to it now.
2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
How's this work? You guys come with? I've got class. This one needs to wait. What did you do?
They'll tell you about it when you get in there.
I'm not gonna be mad.
Not with me. Just please try not to.
Relax.
So this notion that you need God or some higher power to create the Earth or the universe is very old and was initially posited by people of a pre-scientific age. Since then, we have learned quite a bit about the universe coming into existence, when that happened. Modern humans don't get their cosmology, they don't get their physics, they don't get their knowledge of the universe from the Bible or any ancient text.
Hello, this is the International Space Station.
Well, this is President Obama. Who am I talking to?
Hello, Mr. President. You're talking to the Increment 28 crew and the crew of the Space Shuttle Atlantis.
Well, listen, it is wonderful to talk to you. And I appreciate you guys taking out the time from your mission. I always want to just let everybody know how personally proud I am of you and the amazing feats you guys are accomplishing in space. And I was here in the Oval Office watching you guys take off last Friday. We're all watching as the 10 of you work together as a team to conduct spacewalks and manage experiments and do all the things that are necessary to keep the space station humming.
All their cosmology goes back to being a flat Earth with an enclosed system. So it's not just the Bible that teaches this. It's many different religious books.
The internet has played an important role in confirming my view of this topic.
That's the problem.
Well, we have the advantage of information today that's outside of channels 2, 4, and 7 and the few networks that are corporately owned. It's pretty easy to say YouTube isn't research, But when you spend enough time, you're picking up quite a bit. And with the discussion groups, panels, we've gone against opposition. We've opposed ourselves. Surprisingly enough, flat Earth is its own worst enemy. So it's not that easy for us to come to consensus. And we find that consensus is orchestrated and not actually scientific in any way.
You know, my grandfather used to tell me growing up, never believe anything you read in the newspaper, right? He told that to me. Now, with the age of the internet, it's like, you know, how much of this misinformation are you getting there? And when you have like eyewitnesses taking video of something, you do have to take everything with a grain of salt. That's why, because of my, my multimedia background, I knew that all that stuff could be faked.
Because of the success of science, there is a kind of I think a kind of pseudoscience that social science is an example of a science which is not a science. They don't do scientific. They follow the forms. You gather data, you do so and so forth, but they don't get any laws. Haven't found out anything. They haven't gone anywhere yet. Maybe someday they will, but it's not very well developed. But what happens is, at an even more mundane level, we get experts on everything that sound like they're sort of scientific expert. They're not scientific. They sit at a typewriter and they make up something like, food grown with fertilizer that's organic is better for you than food grown with fertilizer that's inorganic. May be true, may not be true, but it hasn't been demonstrated one way or the other. But they'll sit there on the typewriter and make up all this stuff as if it's science, and then become an expert on foods, organic foods, and so on. There's all kinds of myths and pseudoscience all over the place. Now, I might be quite wrong. Maybe they do know all this thing. But I don't think I'm wrong. See, I have the advantage of having found out how hard it is to get to really know something, how careful you have to be about checking the experiments, how easy it is to make mistakes and fool yourself. I know what it means to know something. And therefore, I see how they get their information. And I can't believe that they know it. They haven't done the work necessary, haven't done the checks necessary, haven't done the care necessary. I have a great suspicion that they don't know that this stuff is, don't know, and they're intimidating people by it. I think so. I don't know the world very well, but that's what I think. Where they'll sit there on the typewriter and make up all this stuff as if it's science, and then become an expert on foods, organic foods, and so on. There's all kinds of myths and pseudoscience all over the place. Now, I might be quite wrong. Maybe they do know all this thing. But I don't think I'm wrong. See, I have the advantage of having found out how hard it is to get to really know something, how careful you have to be about checking the experiments, how easy it is to make mistakes and fool yourself. I know what it means to know something. And therefore, I see how they get their information. And I can't believe that they know it. They haven't done the work necessary, haven't done the checks necessary, haven't done the care necessary. I have a great suspicion that they don't know that this stuff is, don't know, and they're intimidating people by it. I think so. I don't know the world very well, but that's what I think.
Okay, this is at the core of the issue of why there are so many flat earth believers out there right now. The problem is the information from someone who decides to start a website or produce a YouTube video is not reliable. When I have a toothache, I go to a dentist. When my car breaks down, I go to a mechanic. When you have questions about cosmology, you should go to an astrophysicist, you should go to a physicist, you should go to people who have spent years and years studying these ideas.
You gather data, you do so and so forth, but they don't get any laws. They haven't found out anything. They haven't gone anywhere yet. Maybe someday they will, but it's not very well developed.
Not some 6-minute YouTube video. There is a percentage of people that if they saw a YouTube video that was not within their scientific chops to refute on the face of it, would believe anything out there.
One of the things I will say is NASA.gov has their own documents out there that we get to vet, which is through the Freedom of Information Act. And would you agree that NASA documents, if they're on display, that we should be able to go and research inside there?
NASA is not proving that the Earth is flat.
Well, they say it in 14 of the
You
documents.
should read what NASA says, and you should listen to what
I
NASA
would
says.
love to see your NASA evidence that the Earth is
It's
flat.
only their contradictory issues
Okay,
that
let's
bring
see.
us here.
At an even more mundane level, we get experts on everything that sound like they're sort of scientific expert. They're not scientific. They sit at a typewriter and they make up something like, food grown with fertilizer that's organic is better for you than food grown with fertilizer that's inorganic. May be true, may not be true, but it hasn't been demonstrated one way or the other.
We're all familiar with the Earthrise photo, right? The Earth is rising over the moon. We're all familiar with it. That's NASA. You can go out to NASA's site. You can download the original, right?
I already know what you're going to ask.
So you bring up the luminance on it, and you can see where it's cut out and pasted there.
They're showing us doctored images that are clearly doctored. The blue marble is a very famous image from 1972. When you talk to the artist from NASA, his name is Robert Simmons, he talks about exactly how it was created from data, and it's not a photograph whatsoever.
Have you seen this image? Chances are the answer is yes. It's the iconic blue marble image, the first photo of the whole Earth. It was taken on December 7th, 1972 by the American crew of the Apollo 17 mission. In the decades since Apollo 17, NASA has released a number of other blue marble images. But because we've never permanently positioned a spacecraft at the appropriate distance and with the appropriate equipment needed to take photos of the entire Earth, many of the images that we use to visualize the Earth are composites. That means they stitch together multiple images taken by satellites in order to create what only appears to be a seamless portrait of the planet as a whole. Composite imaging is an extremely valuable tool for helping us study the Earth. Until now, though, we haven't had the capacity to take snapshots of the entire Earth on a regular basis. That's where the Deep Space Climate Observatory, or DISCOVER mission, comes in. DISCOVER is a satellite that was launched earlier this year as part of a collaboration among NASA, NOAA, and the U.S. Air Force. The mission has multiple purposes. It will help NOAA monitor the sun for space weather, which has the potential to severely disrupt our nation's telecommunications infrastructure and power grid. And it will help us understand how heat and radiation move across our Earth's atmosphere.
He added clouds.
Let me explain.
He added a highlight of the sun.
If you take, on your phone, most phones have that panoramic image. When you do that, you're taking a series of pictures, and the phone cleverly stitches that together.
Saying how it's presented. It's presented as a real photograph.
So when NASA takes real photos and they either clean them up for color or they stitch them together so it's one large image, it doesn't mean they're CGI.
You're talking about composites. I'm what you call a globe denier. You could even get me into a virtual construct if I can't find the borders myself.
What shape would you say you think the Earth is?
It appears to me to be a stationary plane, as opposed to the vastness of infinity of space. I would find it to be an ice plane where we have a localized sun and our environment thrives there. These particular people let us on television. This is a brilliant opportunity to speak. We've been suppressed, censored by mainstream media. Alternative media is just a thing of beauty for me.
Come on. You're a well-educated man, Coop, and a trained pilot. And an engineer. Okay, well, right now, we don't need more engineers. We didn't run out of television screens and planes. We ran out of food. The world needs farmers. Good farmers, like you and Tom. Uneducated farmers. We're a caretaker generation, Coop. And things are getting better. Maybe your grandkids will get to be engineers. We down here, sir.
I view the other side as uneducated.
I'm running.
They think they are uneducated?
I'm running for this.
Well, they certainly think they're educated.
And they're following quite a bit of the university system, what we call scientism.
Right, scientism.
Obviously is the belief in what's written, where we tend to be exploring in the field with physical properties, not theories of any kind. We're using actual measurements that are calculated not by our guidelines, but the guidelines of science as we know it. I can only hope they're uneducated as opposed to disingenuous.
Because of the success of science, there is a kind of I think a kind of pseudoscience that social science is an example of a science which is not a science. They don't do scientific. They follow the forms. You gather data, you do so and so forth, but they don't get any laws. Haven't found out anything. They haven't gone anywhere yet.
Well, that's the other thing too, because we know that it was on a large scale, the government has been disingenuous, and they're pushing a narrative. Right?
Someone put this together from just one episode of her show from last March, and I'm going to play it for you. Here we go.
Vladimir Putin, Russia hates Russia, Putin, Russia, Moscow, Russian, pro-Russian, the Russians, Moscow, Russia, Putin, Russia against us. Russians rush against the U.S. The Russian government scheme. The Russians, Vladimir Putin, Russia, Putin and Russia, Moscow, Russia, the Russians, Putin, Russia, the Soviet Empire.
Miss Hanley's here to talk about Murph.
Murph is a great kid. She's really bright, but she's been having a little trouble lately. She brought this in to show the other students the section on the lunar landings.
Yeah, that's one of my old textbooks. She always loved the pictures.
It's an old federal textbook. We've replaced them with the corrected versions.
Corrected?
Explaining how the Apollo missions were fake to bankrupt the Soviet Union.
You don't believe we went to the moon?
I believe it was a brilliant piece of propaganda that the Soviets bankrupted themselves, pouring resources into rockets and other useless machines.
Useless machines.
And if we don't want a repeat of the excess and wastefulness of the 20th century, then we need to teach our kids about this planet, not tales of leaving it.
So it's hard for us. I mean, I'm sure that you've met people too. It's like, look, are you haven't looked into it yet? Or are you a shill? Are you part of a disinformation campaign?
I don't think you guys are uneducated. I think you're wrongly educated.
I think the problem with what I've seen in the flat earth crowd is that it's not that they're undereducated, but they, instead of looking at evidence and letting the evidence guide to where the ultimate conclusion is, they start with a conclusion and then they try to cherry pick evidence to support their pre-drawn conclusion.
So the thing of it is once you start to really take a hard look at the evidence, and you are unafraid of just standing for the truth wherever that may lead you, then people end up becoming flat earthers.
I'm sorry about your wife, Mr. Cooper. But Murph got into a fistfight with several of her classmates over this Apollo nonsense. So we thought it would be best to bring you in and see what ideas you might have for dealing with her behavior on the home front.
Yeah, you know what? There's a game tomorrow night. She's going through a bit of a baseball phase. Her favorite team's playing. There's gonna be candy and soda. I think I'll take her to that.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition.
Really excited about today. Incredibly proud of the SpaceX team. They've done an incredible job of creating really the most advanced rocket in the world and biggest rocket in the world. I'm still trying to absorb everything that happened because it seems surreal to me.
Space
Going to be a lot of things happening in space. Because space is the world's newest warfighting domain. Amid grave threats to our national security, American superiority in space is absolutely vital. And we're leading, but we're not leading by enough, but very shortly we'll be leading by a lot. The Space Force will help us deter aggression and control the ultimate high ground. With today's signing, I will proudly appoint General J. Raymond, the first Chief of Space Operations.
Pulsars. And by the way, the Trump Space Force, you know, there are there's a whole lot of Trump haters out there. But if you want to hate Trump rationally, you want to not hate him no matter what he says. You want to evaluate statement by statement what he says, right? That's what you need to do. He says, I want a Space Force. Well, let's think about that, okay? In the Second World War, there was the Air Force, except they were not their own branch. They were part of the Army. It was called the Army Air Force. And then we realized that command and control in the air needs different kinds of soldiers because they have to be pilots. It's a different kind of decision making, different kinds of tactical actions you would have in the theater of operations. And so it was sensible to spawn off a new branch of the military called the Air Force. You should know that operations in space, in the vacuum of the universe, is a different regime that you're operating in from moving through the air.
This is I think the most inspiring thing that I've ever seen. There are many troubles in the world, of course, and these are important and we need to solve them. But we also need things that make us excited to be alive, that make us glad to wake up in the morning and be fired up about the future and think, yeah, the future is going to be great. You know, and this space exploration is one of those things. And there's really, we're faced with a choice. Which future do you want? Do you want the future where we become a spacefaring civilization and are in many worlds and are out there among the stars, or one where we are forever confined to Earth? And I say it is the first. And I hope you agree with me. Yeah. So what the question? The critical breakthrough that's needed for us to become a spacefaring civilization is to make space travel like air travel.
Go for main engine start. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and...
T-minus 15, stand by for terminal count.
All right, guys. Final.
9,
10,
9,
8,
6, 5, 4,
2, 1. That thing took off.
Oh my God.
Okay, let's go.
All engines look good. Beginning roll program. Prepare for stage 1 separation. Stage 1. There it is, Mach 1. Everybody good? Plenty of slaves for my robot colony?
I gave him my humor settings. We fit in better with this unit. Keeps it relaxes us.
Giant, sarcastic robot. What a great idea. I have a Q-lot I can use when I'm joking, if you like. That'd probably help. Yeah, you can use it to find your way back to the ship after I blow you out the airlock. What's your humor setting, Doris? That's 100%. Bring it on down to 75, please. Stage 2, separation.
rocket, a defining innovation of modern history. It signifies men's dreams of stretching the limits of possibility, defying our earthly bounds, and blasting up toward the heavens. It is an icon of progress and a symbol of war.